Ever wonder why your compliance training can't remember what each of your employees already know? Wish you could deploy one course that magically contains only the topics each learner needs? What if there was an intelligent training solution that only taught and reinforced learners' past weaknesses, without test outs or methods that aren't regulatory defensible? It sounds too good to be true, but it's not, because our award-winning Scholar technology just got smarter with AI learning paths. Designed to reduce training fatigue and show learners that we know who they are, AI Learning Path provides only relevant content based on the learner's past performance. Whether nudging each employee on their own lowest performing area or rewarding their know-how on a specific topic, anything is possible. Scholar's adaptive algorithms and simulation-based learning are now at another level, while still producing rich behavioral insight, better equipping you for predictive compliance and behavior change in your organization. To find out more, email us at info@trueoffice.com or visit trueofficelearning.com.
Hello, and welcome to our ECI Live, Navigating AI to Optimize Risk Management and Minimize Ethical Implications. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Please make sure your mics are muted. Also, please use the Q&A box to submit your questions to the speakers. The Q&A will take place at the end of the presentation. If you don't see a Q&A box on your screen, click on the blue Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. If you have other questions or technical issues, please use the chat box or the help buttons also located at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, you can find handouts and information about the speakers in the resources list and speaker bios boxes respectively. And with that, please welcome Florence Fumeray, Director of Marketing and Events, who will give a brief overview of ECI's working groups.
Good afternoon, everyone. So excited about having you all join us for today's webinar. And just so some of you who don't know who ECI is, we're one of the oldest nonprofit associations dating back to 1922. We are a best practice of community organizations that are committed to creating and sustaining high quality ethics and compliance programs. And as a member of ECI, you have an array of benefits. And one of them includes participating in a working group. There are like 3 key benefits of doing so. One of is you get to collaborate and meet and network with your industry colleagues. You get to also create a best practice working group paper. That's why we're all here today. And you get to present your work to hundreds of colleagues in the industry. So with that said, there are about 6 working groups that we're starting in June. So if you have your pen ready, you might want to write these down. They are environmental, social, and governance reporting, third-party risk, extended risk management, E&C considerations and remote work environments, positioning E&C as a strategic leader during times of organizational change and stress, best practices in E&C metrics and data visualization, and E&C challenges for multinational organizations. So if you're interested in signing up, fill out the evaluation at the end and just let us know of your interest. I just want to, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cindy Satani. She is the Chief Integrity and Compliance Officer at Indiviewer. Cindy?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Florence. And I do want to give a thank you to ECI for this fantastic opportunity to lead this working group. It's been an amazing opportunity to collaborate with my colleagues. And in today's perspective, 2 of our working group members have agreed to do this panel with me today in order to present that work. So let me introduce them to you. We have Julie Gershman, who is principal of Solution Jewels LLC. She was the former Global Ethics Officer for Prudential Financial Inc. We have Colleen Dorsey, who is the Director of Organizational Ethics and Compliance at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she was former in-house counsel at Land O'Lakes, Inc. And I'm Cindy Satani, current Chief Integrity and Compliance Officer for Indiviewer in Richmond, Virginia. And in my past, I have 15 years experience in US and global roles with Novartis. I also want to give a thank you to the 17 people who contributed to this working group. Every single one of them played a role. And while we have some folks who've had some experience in this topic, I don't want to leave you with the thought that we are all AI experts. We very much embarked on this with the idea to learn, and learn we did. So we're very pleased to be able to present this report to you today. So where do we start? And that was literally the question of the working group as we picked this topic and thought, with a topic as massive as AI, what are we going to do in presenting this? And how do you not boil the ocean? And we quickly aligned around two concepts. One, taking what might be a complex or seemingly technical subject and trying to make it a little more simple to understand. And two, trying to bring some practical examples forward. So that's really how we embarked on the report. And today we want to talk to you about that report. And we recognize that our companies are all probably in various places, whether a company hasn't started working on it yet, or thinking about it, or some where they've got solutions on the business side of the house, maybe even in the compliance program, or both. So we're all likely at different places in this, but hopefully we're all on this webinar today to learn more and to continue to build. So what we're going to take you through is the way we laid out our report. First, we're going to do an introduction to artificial intelligence. Basically, what's the lingo? What's the language of artificial intelligence? Next is leveraging data. That maybe scary topic of, yeah, you do have to work with data and you have to know a little bit about it in order to do this right. And third would be the practical applications of it. So we're going to hopefully give you a few examples today of the different ways that AI or machine learning is applied. And in our report, we have more. And lastly, and importantly, ethical implications. This is, clearly where we really shine. And I think there was a lot of energy around that topic. So let's start with, a polling question to understand who's in the audience with us today. So if those attending can give us your answers. See if we get the results of the poll, or whether I move it forward. There we go. All right, so we have representation across the various groups, which is really what we expected for the members of ECI. So now I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who's going to start us off.
Great. Thanks, Cindy. It's a pleasure to be here today with everyone. Hope you, your families, your colleagues, your loved ones are all healthy, sane, and safe among this pandemic. And thank you to ECI for this opportunity. We have a lot of ground to cover. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of AI, thought we'd reinforce the value add to the chief ethics and compliance officers, ethics and compliance and risk professionals among us. There are real practical implications. If we think about our work, we think about many different buckets. The main ones are leadership, right? Leadership of ourselves and our teams and learning. It's about our BAU and testing and monitoring, surveilling and assessing. And the third most common bucket, I would say, is advice and counsel to our constituents around the business solutions that they are looking to achieve. And as we think about these different buckets, there is applicability of AI in each of them. And when we think about the value that we can add, it is around knowing AI so that we can optimize our resources and leverage data and make sure that we are focusing on our most significant risks. It's also around managing the future of work and where we're going. Like all the other factors around business acumen, knowledge about AI can help us be an incredibly strategic partner to our businesses. With all that we do, we uphold the ethical standards of our companies and we help them advance in terms of where the business is going, where our customers and the markets are going, and how do we evolve our ethical standards or the understanding of our ethical standards to meet the demands of our constituents. And lastly, our regulators already expect that we're mining and leveraging data in how we move forward. So let's take a look at some of the nuts and bolts of artificial intelligence. And we're going to move from the left side of the screen to the right. And in doing that, we will take a look first at artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is made up of three specific components. And if we think about them, they are learning, perception, and cognition. And let's do a quick explanation on each of these. I would also suggest that if your companies and your organizations haven't sat down together to align on these definitions, it's the first thing the working group did, I would suggest doing that. It's a great way to bring together all your different constituents, demonstrate your knowledge and thirst for knowledge in this area, and make sure that as you go through planning processes, everybody's working off of the same set. So learning, perception, and cognition. On learning can happen in several ways. The first way is that a set of developers can put together an algorithm, which is basically a string of commands in a linear way that helps the computer understand the data and provides an output. This sequence, this algorithm, can be manipulated either by the developers or machines can learn on their own. The second piece is perception, and that is where a computer can recognize data and sometimes images and interpret it across a set of data. And the third is cognition, and this happens when computers apply reason over data to identify future pathways. And what's really incredible is we used one example in the paper, and it's this company out of China called InfoVision. And InfoVision's goal and need was to read 1.4 billion medical scans a year, and they did not have enough radiologists to do that effectively, efficiently, and accurately. And they built a deep learning solution through algorithms using existing data to help them read future data. So if we think about learning, perception, and cognition with this example, we have teaching the computer what to look for. We have the recognition of potential lung cancer. And then in cognition, we have potential actions that are given to the radiologists on paths to consider moving forward. In the middle of your screen, you'll see machine learning, and that's a little bit different. Machine learning starts with feeding a training set of data to a machine, and the machine comes up with the algorithm. And the example that we use, and thank you, Cindy, for the use of your dogs and your neighbor's cat here, is if we have millions of images of animals and we only want just to see the pictures of dogs, we can feed pictures of dogs to the computer. The computer will create an algorithm to recognize dogs moving forward, and then you can push your data through it, and you would come up with a subset of just dogs. No offense to cat lovers out there. And all the way to the right of your screen, you see natural language processing. And this is perhaps something that we're all familiar with most readily every day when we use Siri and Alexa in our homes. And also if we call a customer service line and we're put in an IVR, the natural language processing understands both and works with both AI and machine learning. It can understand language, it can understand emotions. So when you're screaming agent and representative into your phone line, it understands that you're agitated and can choose a path to escalate your call. Moving to the next slide, one of the questions that we had with the data, I'm just making sure that I have actually moved this slide. There we go, is why now? Right, if AI has been in the making for over 50 years, almost 70 years, what's the urgency now for us to learn this discipline? And we have 3 items on the screen, and I'd like to share 2 more with you. The first 3 are the massive amounts of data that are available to us, not only through our companies, but also data that we can purchase. The second is the low cost of computing and data storage at this point in time. And the third would be the breakneck speed at which algorithms and tools are evolving. I would also add that over the last 2 years, the privacy laws, there's been a proliferation of privacy laws across the globe, and they have they have created some pressure or fire, right? Fuel to the fire of our burning platform here. And the second item I'd like to add to this list are the expectations of two of our constituents, our regulators that we understand this space, and to our customers and what they expect from us. Next, we're going to move to a polling question because we want to understand where everyone here is on the spectrum of understanding AI. So if you could take the poll, that would be terrific. So as we take a quick look at the results here, we see that most of us, 100% of us at this point in time, at least that's what I'm seeing. I don't know if other people are seeing different results on the poll, are novice with no experience. And that's to be expected. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily have had an expert sign up for this webinar, which gets to your data in and the cleanliness of data out here. But two items here, whether we're inexperienced in learning or novice with no experience. One, you're in a community of people that have the same learning curve, and it's an opportunity really to get to that first bucket, right? Leadership of self and team in terms of what's to learn. And the second item here is that ECI has a great working paper that you can leverage, and hope that you will spend some time reading that. And so with that, I will pass it along to Colleen. Thanks.
Hello, thank you, Julie. Thank you, ECI, for hosting this great seminar, and thank you all for participating. This is great information, and I think to Cindy's point, to Julie's point, we're all in learning mode. The section that I'm about to talk about here has to do with data and how do you leverage the data. And I think we've touched on how important data is. Really, machine learning and AI begins and ends with data. And so how do you go about finding out how to best leverage data? And what we'll talk about here this afternoon is conducting a data audit. That's one way to get a grip on how much data you have. But I think even before that, it's important, or at least it was important for me to understand how data can be acquired. And, you know, it's in the example that Julie gave us about the dog recognition program, that data might have been inputted manually. Let's say she had 100 pictures of dogs and they were labeled and they were all inputted manually. That's not likely the way it was done. I'm sure it was, you know, it might have been that the data was scraped from social media websites and from different places and downloaded into some kind of a data warehouse or data lake, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But data can also be comprised of behaviors. I read an article once about Facebook actually having data on how we press our keyboard to determine our mood or our emotions. So behavior is definitely something that can be tracked in data. Behavior of machines, and we'll talk about this in the next slide where we talk about practical applications of AI. When you think about what companies use data that from a machine, maybe it's the machine ID number, maybe it's the pressure the machine is outputting, maybe it's the heat of the machine in order for a company to understand when preventative maintenance is due. So there's that kind of data. And then finally, Julie alluded to this, you can purchase data, and that's what Facebook does. It purchases data from third parties in order to populate what your business needs for data purposes. So, kind of having given you an idea of what and where data comes from, I think it's important then to also understand some of the terminology and the best practices used to get your head around data. And one of those is this data audit. So when we look at the data audit slide, the first square here is a data lake. And again, to Julie's point, I was not familiar with this terminology before this working group began. And so in true working group form, had to look it up. And one of the things that I found helpful is Google when you're looking up things. But a data lake, according to Amazon Web Services, I liked their definition, and I'll just read it to you. A centralized repository that allows you to store all your structured and unstructured data at any scale. You can store your data as is without first having to structure the data and run different types of analytics, from dashboards and visualizations to big data processing, real-time analytics, and machine learning to guide better decisions. So, you know, as we're going to kind of reference throughout this webinar today, you know, what does that mean then for a compliance and ethics professional? To understand a data lake means that security of the information that's in that data lake is pretty important to protect, right? So that's just one aspect of, you know, understanding your data and all of what encompasses having access to large amounts of data. So, you know, it's been proven that organizations that successfully generate business value, or that organizations that successfully generate business value from their data will outperform their peers. So implementing this data lake allows companies to do these new kinds of analytics, like machine learning, with new sources like log files, data from click streams, social media, the internet connected devices. All of this data can be stored in a data lake. And then this helps companies identify and act upon opportunities for business growth faster by attracting and retaining customers, boosting productivity, proactively maintaining devices, and making informed decisions. So you can see where this kind of having a data lake would be very beneficial to a company. A data inventory is just what you would think of with respect to an inventory when you're doing, for instance, an inventory count. So let's say you record things like repository location, the content type, you're labeling the data in a specific way that makes sense for your business, who owns the data, whether the data comprises personal information, so that it might be relevant that you comply with GDPR and the California Consumer Protection Act and other privacy acts. If your data is not yet labeled in a data inventory, it would need to be datafied, which means that it would need to be labeled in the way that makes sense for your company in this data inventory, so that the algorithms can be created from this datafied information. So this will help ensure that the data from all over the organization is called the same thing. You can imagine that's a huge, huge undertaking with companies the size of, you know, Walmart or Target or Lockheed Martin. These are huge organizations with data in every aspect of their businesses. And data also includes, you know, data that might not be in a piece of paper. It might be written notes on a note card from a seminar that your senior vice president attended. So a data map complements the data inventory and sorts the data into a searchable and easily identifiable format. So think about a spreadsheet where you can search certain terms, and that's really what a data map does. So in order to determine if data is useful or determine what type of data is necessary or desirable, it's important to think about hypothetical use cases for the data. So this helps us define the information needed and the system the data will come from. So for instance, maybe your company is trying to predict which employees might be prone to commit fraud. This question will guide the data points to build the appropriate algorithm. So how can we better identify employees that are prone to commit fraud? Well, what are the data points that we need, and what are the sources of data that we can pull from in order to best answer that question, and that will inform how to build the algorithm. So, but this is also where bias can set in. So for instance, if the data used as inputs into the algorithm to solve for the question I just posed includes historically biased arrest records, as an example, then the algorithm produced as a result of that data is going to be biased. So this is where another area where compliance and ethics professionals are essential to understand and evaluate the models and understand and evaluate where the data came from, what is comprised of the data, and to think through correlations that might occur as a result of the data that weren't intended. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And finally, in the investment phasing portion of your audit, you'll need to continually review and modify the data that you have. It takes a long time to clean, scrub data and to find data. So plan on phasing it out and really be mindful of how it ties to the company's strategy. This kind of project is an investment on the largest scale for most organizations. And so really be mindful of how you're going to go about investing and phasing this portion of your audit. So on the next slide, we have some practical implications. Well, we wanted to talk about some practical implications of AI. I've already talked about optimizing business practices, enhancing diagnostic research. There are lots of examples, even in our current state, in this pandemic state right now, of AI that is being used to track where people might be that are at high risk. I listened to a podcast called TWIML, and that means This Week in AI and ML, and they had a researcher from MIT on that talked about a AI product that she was researching and developing for children that had autism in order to help them recognize emotion in speech. And so, and then the example that Julie gave us with respect to the X-rays and the, to be able to have AI systems help identify or flag X-rays that might be problematic from a cancer perspective or something like that. These are ways that AI is being used right today. And then with respect to predicting behavior, I mentioned Facebook and the keystrokes, and there are, and we'll talk a little bit more here in a couple slides about some products that are out there as examples that might be accumulating location information and other behavior type information that we're not even aware of, and that clearly has these considerations for our compliance and ethics professionals on the call here today. The data protection, data privacy, this kind of basic right of human integrity to have sort of agency over your own data and to protect your identity and protect your own assets. So those are some of the practical implications. And then the bottom of this screen says cross-functional stakeholders at the table. That is very, very critical as you're thinking about what your companies can do with respect to AI and ML and what it is that you bring to the table. I think that insisting might not be the right word, but ensuring that this cross-functional groups that have historically not gathered, maybe it's HR gathering with your program developers and your IT people and your engineers and your legal and your compliance. And those aren't groups that have historically kind of cross-functionally worked together. So that's really important. So with that, I think we will go to the next polling question. If you could all answer that question, we would appreciate it. Okay, so 100% of the audience are implementing some form of AI or machine learning in the compliance function. So having said that, we will try to tailor some of what we're going to talk to here to that. And the next two slides give us some ideas. They're examples that we created in order for you to start to consider some of the ethical considerations. So this first product, which is with respect to data mining in order to adjust prices. This is an actual product that's actually out of Switzerland, but just thinking about, you know, did these shoppers consent to this type of collection of their data? That's just one ethical consideration. The next example is analytics for determining, taking all of a person's data from across all of their devices to prevent or to present this detailed analysis of traffic between sources. Again, you know, was there consent? And then we could have probably a whole seminar on consent and whether consent is actually given in the state that it is in some of the documents that we get exposed to today. It's jargon that is hardly understandable by, you know, the company lawyers, let alone lay people that don't understand they're even giving their consent. So these are just a couple examples of the ethical considerations. And with that, I will turn this over to Cindy Satani, who is going to talk about ethical implications of AI and ML.
Thank you. Yes, pardon my departure as my home phone rang, which never happens, but of course during the webinar it'll ring. So in our report, we looked at the ethical implications, and there's so many different models you could anchor on. We went with these 5 principles: transparency, business strategy, trust, privacy and security, and values and social impact. And in our report, we take you through the considerations, the risks, the impacts, the enablers for each of these. Today, we're going to cover at a high level the considerations behind each. So Julie, Colleen, and I will go a little bit further into each of these. Let me start with transparency. So there are many successful examples of AI that we could probably focus on that provided benefits to society and to organizations and to employees. But we probably can equally cite highly publicized shortcomings of AI and the potential reputational damage or skepticism that some may have in the use of AI in terms of being able to use this technology fairly, safely, and ethically. So there are some considerations. So if you look at the first one, disclose how AI will be used. Well, how would you do that? So one of the ways would be to publish a statement of your AI principles and make it available to all of your stakeholders, whether they're inside the company or outside the company, so that they understand how you intend to use the AI. Next is disclose how AI works. And this is one where the decisions that AI makes should be traceable and explainable by a human. And I will tell you, this one from personal experience, it's really important as a compliance officer to be able to take what might seem complicated, you might shy away from it, but demystify it and be able to explain it in layperson terms. Because if you had to explain it to a regulator or anyone else, you need to be able to do that as much to manage risks as it is to manage the AI itself. The third one is articulate business practices for fair use of AI. How would you do that? Well, you take those principles that we just talked about and you translate them into governance, into policies that your organization can apply day to day, whether it's on the business side or the compliance side, so that they understand the do's and don'ts. What should you use AI for and what shouldn't you use AI for? Where is your company, drawing that line with ethics front and center? The next is ensure robust change management. Now, in all of the things that we've implemented as compliance professionals, change management comes up a lot. And sometimes it's shortchanged. Sometimes it gets the full attention it deserves. When it comes to AI solutions, we definitely need to focus on change management. And that's really thinking through not just the changes in infrastructure that AI might bring, changes to your products and services, but considering all of the stakeholders and any necessary business process or job reengineering that may be coming. Ensure the AI is financially sustainable. This is one where you really need to think about the resources needed to keep the AI solution going strong, but not just the AI tool itself, but what resources do you need to extract the information and data out of it? Because as you know, having the data and not doing anything with it likely will create more risk than not having gotten it to begin with. And the thing to think about in the financial aspect of this is, will the cost-benefit analysis still be favorable in a business downturn? Would you still be willing to invest? Because this is something that really does need to be sustained over time. I think back to when I was implementing an aggregate spend solution. And for the first time ever, I had to ask for basically an open checkbook and said, look, once we invest in this, we have to be ready to keep advancing on it. And that's really the same way you have to think about these AI solutions. The next one is to provide forums for oversight and impact discussions. So if you think about it, you think about these autonomous cars, a lot of us have our own opinions about it. So when you have things that are going to be externally facing to customers, you may want to create a discussion forum so that you understand what they're thinking and feeling. Are they going to embrace this? Are there things that you could factor in and mitigate? And for your own employees, let's say you're thinking about an AI solution for performance management. Employees are probably going to have an opinion about that. So it would behoove us to have a discussion group to really talk through that and understand those perspectives. And importantly, too, provide Mythbusters. Organize a group that is really the go-to for questions, concerns, and clarifications that over time in the life cycle can continue to address the questions that may arise. The next principle is business strategy. So technology continues to evolve at a pace we cannot keep up with, and AI evolves as well. And this absolutely should be tied to business strategy, just like anything we do. What's really important is building this into our risk assessment processes as well, and thinking through the brand and reputational impacts. So if we think about aligning it in the organizational strategy, it really should be leveraged to advance the organization's strategic agenda or help it fulfill its purpose or mission. And importantly, there really needs to be buy-in from senior management. On the governance infrastructure, so as Colleen talked to us about data, it's probably naturally built in that you'll have a governing body over the data and the architecture itself. But what you need to think about is a governing body, like a committee, that will look at the ethical standards and look at this across the life cycle to say, what is this tool generating, and really help guide it from that perspective, and maybe a cross-functional body that really helps reinforce organizational accountability as well. On the brand and reputation, it's really a matter of looking at all the different stakeholders and planning mitigation strategies for how that solution might be perceived and whether it will be embraced. So thinking about, employees, investors, NGOs, prospective employees, from all those different angles to really consider the potential impact on brand and reputation. And lastly, risk assessment and mitigation, right? We need to bake these solutions into our risk assessment protocols and plan out the mitigation so that we've effectively thought through what are all the potential risks related to this AI solution. And just like we do with our risk assessment, use the results of that to influence our decisions and our resources and outline tactics and measurements to really ensure that smart risks are well managed. So let me turn it back over to Julie to take us through another principle.
Thanks, Cindy. A critical consideration for us always is how do we ensure the trust of our stakeholders, including, and importantly, the public. And this is the third principle in the ethical implications, trust. Many of our companies are at the crossroads of ideation, experimentation, and implementation with AI. Responsible adoption of AI must have an ethical framework so that we can have trustworthy development, deployment, and use of AI. And in other words, that it is and it's perceived to be safe, secure, and fair. And to that end, last year, in April of 2019, the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI released this set of guidelines for trustworthy AI. And here are the elements that AI systems should meet to be trustworthy. And I know it seems maybe a little bit confusing because we have the 5 principles of the ethical implications, and here now we have another set of 7 topics, but they do interplay and they are well connected. And I highly recommend this paper as not only a primer on how to understand AI, but its implications and how to be leaders in your organizations with its implementation. So let's just cover a few. Of course, the working paper covers these in more depth, as does the initial paper from the Commission. So as it relates to human agency and oversight, at its core, this is the need for human intervention in process. And we've talked about this a little bit up front. We talked about it with the integrity of data and making sure what you're putting into the systems and what it's evaluating is accurate. And we've talked about it in terms of the iteration of the algorithms. And I've seen some of the Q&A, we do have questions about algorithm iteration. And human intervention here is always the best practice. In terms of technical robustness and safety, on this point, we need to have confidence in the security and resilience of our systems. And that is not only our systems, but the information contained in our systems. And this gets to cybersecurity and attacks that may come from different places. In terms of the element of privacy and data governance, this includes the integrity of our data and respect for data privacy laws, and of course the governance over data access. And this of course harps back to a number of the items that both Colleen and Cindy have mentioned around how we get our data, who has access to it, what we use it for. And I worked with a wonderful privacy officer at Prudential. Her name is Laura Weiss, and she's incredible. And she said at one point, data is not a field of dreams. You don't build it and they will come, but you build it with a specific purpose, because the data you choose to put into that data lake that you draw from already has certain biases built into it potentially, and you want to make sure you don't perpetuate those. Cindy's already covered transparency pretty thoroughly, and when it comes to diversity and non-discrimination and fairness, we'll cover bias and risk in a moment, but this really talks about accessibility and making sure that we aren't perpetuating historical problems into the future based on the outputs of our algorithms. Colleen is going to cover societal impact in a moment. Make sure that we think about sustainability when we're thinking about that as well. And on accountability, we can think about the auditability and the iteration of data that we've referenced a few times, and the concept of data minimization. These elements mirror many of the values and protocols that our organizations already have built into our strategic and planning sessions. And it may be a good time for us as compliance and ethics professionals and risk professionals to review those processes to make sure that they cover the risks and the benefits of AI. And so let's move to the next slide. And while we're not going to cover it extensively, it is covered in our paper. We're going to talk about risks for a moment. And of course, this is probably our wheelhouse as compliance and ethics professionals and risk mitigators by nature. But we'd be remiss if we didn't mention some of these. And it's also important to note that when the human factor also contains risk. And it's not as if these risks or biases didn't exist before. Now we're just talking about a different scale. And we may actually also be talking about visibility into process as algorithms iterate. The main takeaway here is for you to think about what framework do you have in place in your organization to evaluate the efficacy and ethics of proposed AI advancements on your constituents, your customers, your employees, the public. And some of the things to keep top in mind include this first dash, which is the need to be vigilant. right? They need to be vigilant in validating our data sets and models to avoid false positives and false negatives. The impact of implicit bias and lack of diversity in the historic AI development community is real. And indeed, AI systems have now been shown to adopt biases of their human developers. The next point is, if you are using historical data as training data for your algorithms, and there is bias built into that historical data, your results and outputs will also have the bias in it. So if we look at historical workplace data or credit data, we know that women and minorities tend to be underrepresented in those sets of data. And because algorithms are mathematical and do not factor in social advancements and concepts, bias may be present, and it's something to keep in mind. Something to keep top of mind. And last here, because of a lack of common regulation and legislation and standards here, it is incredibly important and practical as the professionals that you are, that you really take a look at your internal controls and make sure that they account for the advancements that are afforded by AI, both the positives and also understanding the potential pitfalls. So moving to the next concept here, the fourth principle, we're going to take a look at privacy and security. And we've spoken about this a few times already. And these concepts and ideas aren't new to us. What is new is the AI layer. And so as our organizations take this AI journey, being mindful of existing rules around data and governance and privacy and the policies that you have in place, and specifically those policies around conflicts of interest and privacy, data governance, and cyber would be a very good place to start. And as you consider these 5 areas on the screen, as you design or enhance your programs, keeping top of mind, always keeping information secure and handled in accordance with policies is needed, and especially those laws that govern the information and where it's kept. Protecting your AI models is similar to protecting your business trade secrets. And as for individuals, are you protecting against bias and the potential mistreatment of vulnerable groups? And the last 2 bullets here, do your AI models protect civil rights? And are they used for the benefit of society? And with that, I'll turn it back over to Colleen.
Thank you, Julie. So this 5th principle, the ethical implications, values, and social impact, I think the best way for me to think about this is that AI should be created in a manner that doesn't just benefit one company or maybe one industry or one sector. It should benefit society as a whole. So there's a quote that I like from the Department of Defense, published a document that says, it's entitled AI Principles, Recommendations on the Ethical Use of Artificial Intelligence by the Department of Defense. They created a Defense Innovation Board, and this was a document that they published. And this was just a quote they used to explain AI. AI is neither inherently positive nor negative. It is an enabling capability akin to electricity, the internal combustion engine, or computers. And as such, it's the decisions of human beings that will determine whether AI will advance or undermine our efforts to make the world safer and more prosperous. So AI needs to be created for social good and for the benefit of humanity. And what might be beneficial or thought to be a social norm in the United States might not be the same as in Dubai. So, if you are working for organizations that have operations all over the world, you really have to think about and include what societal norms are in those areas, as opposed to just the view that we see in the United States. I mentioned earlier the cross-functional teams. Diversity on those teams is critical. I think that it brings the different viewpoints to the table with respect to AI that will allow to ensure that, these social impacts are positives, the advancement of society, and it's really important to consider both the short and long-term benefits, and then recognizing the potential impacts on behavior and considering the impacts on jobs. All of these really are critical and essential elements of the values and social impact. I think that we are at the end. I know that there's a Q&A section. Oh, I'm sorry, we have one more slide. And this is really our call to action for all of you. Really at the end of the day, artificial intelligence and machine learning is happening. It's happening everywhere, from the software grids that power our power grids to the healthcare that we're getting every day. So, understanding and embracing this knowledge is really important. And also just to engage early and really try to understand what the business people are trying to achieve. As Julie talked about, there are risk assessments. There's a risk assessment that I created that I will provide to Alyssa and ECI that might be helpful for some of you to use, but really advocate for thoughtful phased approaches like I talked about with the data. Keep on top of the regulatory issues. There is a website called govtracks.gov, I believe, and I can also give that to Alyssa. That brings you right to bills and regulations that are being proposed with respect to AI. So for instance, there's an Algorithmic Accountability Act that's being proposed. And you can see in that some of what the government is going to be looking for is some of these assessments for companies to do, like Julie mentioned. So, and then really build those relationships between those cross-functional teams that have different viewpoints and diverse, and really that's really our call to action here this morning. I don't know if Julie or Cindy would like to add anything else, but I know we have some questions in the queue as well.
Yeah, so why don't we go into the Q&A? Julie, do you want to cover one topic, and then I'll round up on with the general response and cover a couple of the other questions?
You got it. So we received some questions around lack of visibility into algorithm evolution and what are some of the best practices around getting your head around that and being able to test and monitor. And what I have found in my experience is the partnership with your data scientists, the partnership with your auditors to create that path to understand how are you going to take a look at what's happening inside the model. We know that we're going to need to be able to explain how the algorithms came to certain conclusions. And in order to be able to do that, you have to understand how it's evolving. So one of the questions as ethics and compliance leaders that we need to answer is, do we let our algorithms and models self-evolve? Or do we require that human intervention before iteration 2.0 is released? And so that's one aspect to answer the question. We can't get too deep into these, but hopefully that's some food for thought. I'll turn it back over to you, Cindy.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. First, Julie mentioned the data scientist. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you may not. You might need to engage one on a short-term basis. Doesn't mean you have to hire a data scientist. And if you have one in the company, even better. But many of us won't. And it goes beyond the skills of our IT department typically. And one of the questions was, what's an example of a data lake architecture? That's really where your data scientist comes in. It's really raw data, but they structure it in such a way that later, as you apply any desired analytics to it, they're able to extract from it and use that data to answer some of these analytic questions. So there's a certain way it's structured, and that's really where you need that expertise to come in. And just to go a little further, because we had two questions around this knowledge of the decisions that are made. And one of the questions was, if you have a number of iterations and now you've lost sight of, how you arrived where you arrived, I think it really is critical. You're going to have to be able to explain how it's working and how it's generating what it's generating. But the one piece of advice I would have on it is, do you have a comparator where you could anchor on and say, look, we know these results are accurate. This is our comparator. So even if there's a little bit of AI magic that's gone on that you've lost track of, are you able to show something that a reasonable person would say validates that those answers can be relied on? I think you want that as a company, but I think that would also help you in any external explanations around the tool. But otherwise, I think Julie was spot on. We really have to manage those iterations so we know at each point what it's returning.
And I would add that there is an organization, it's called IEEE. It stands for the Institute of Electrical Engineers, something like that. But it is a very large organization of 400 and some thousand engineers, technologists, developers, and they are working on standards to develop for companies to use for transparency and for purposes of making sure that in the design of a product, it's designed ethically. And so it's, these are issues that are being worked on. One of the other comments in the Q&A was, have you read The Future Computed? And some of the other principles that have been published out there by other companies, Microsoft, Google, there are a fair amount of principles out there. Workday is a company that's actually published some information on the World Health Organization site. No, it's not the World Health Organization site. It's the World Economic Forum that has their whole process, and she has shared all of it, which is super helpful to, so it's important that while standards engineers have these standards to develop, every company is going to have different ways that they implement these kinds of processes and standards in order to make sure that they've covered off these issues. I don't know if we had any other questions.
I think it's time for our wrap up. Unfortunately, we could go on for quite a while on this subject.
Hi, everyone. This is Florence. Oh, did you want to take one more question?
Nope, go ahead.
No, I think we've for the most part covered or answered them individually, and we can post, I'm assuming, get back to everybody after.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And thanks to Julie, Colleen, and Cindy. I just want to let everyone know that there are some handouts that you might want to download in this platform. It is being recorded, so you will have access to it probably within an hour or so. Also want to bring you up to speed on a couple of events that are happening. June 17th, LRN has a webinar from California to New York Island. This data is private for you and me. And then June 25th, it's an ECI live from our research department talking about the Global Business Ethics Survey. And that will be pressure to bend the rules and the implications on workplace ethics behaviors. So just go to ethics.org/events, and you can go ahead and sign up for those 2 upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I would just add before we sign off that there's been some questions that have come in that maybe we can answer, and just the ECI folks can disperse to all of the attendees.
We can do that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.